Welcome to Better Teaching, Only Stuff That Works, a podcast for teachers, instructional coaches, administrators, and anyone else who supports teachers in the classroom. This show is a proud member of the BE Podcast Network, shows that help you go beyond education. Find all our shows at bepodcastnetwork.com. I am Gene Tavernetti, the host for this podcast, and my goal for this episode, like all episodes, is that you laugh at least once and that you leave with an actionable idea for better teaching. A quick reminder, no cliches, no buzzwords, only stuff that works. If you are a listener to this podcast, you are probably also interested in much of the discussions about science of learning that we have in our social media. And one of the things that we've learned, or that's discussed frequently, is that how far ahead of the US the UK is in implementing many of the science of learning ideas. That's why I was so excited to have my guest today is somebody from the UK, but she's also taught in the United States. So she has that perspective and is able to compare what it's like to teach in the two different systems. So my guest today is Helen Reynolds. Helen has taught physics and science for 36 years, 22 of which were in a public school in the UK. She was involved in the design of the UK national curriculum and has written textbooks for middle school science and high school physics, and has worked for the Institute of Physics, training teachers to teach physics. She is the recipient of 2 national UK teaching awards and an MBE medal from the Queen for services to science education. She's worked in a private school in the US since 2016 and is currently teaching high school physics and AP physics. And for those folks in the UK, the AP physics would be equivalent to your A levels. She teaches in Tucson, Arizona, and she is fascinated by the application of the findings of cognitive science in the classroom, where she has been using extensively and in strategies to get more students to choose physics. She's presented at Research Ed in Denver last year and will be presenting at Research Ed in New York in March. So happy to have Helen on today. I think you're really going to like this one. Hi, Helen. Great to see you. Both of us a little bit under the weather, so we'll see how this goes. But so very happy to see you. And like I said in my introduction, one of the reasons I really wanted to have you on the show is because you have experience teaching in both the UK and in the United States. And one of the things that we both know and we need to recognize is that just because you've taught at a school or a couple schools, it's very hard to generalize that experience to the US. But still, I think you are special in that way about having experience in both the UK and the United States. And one of the first things that I'd like to ask you, like in your bio, you said that you had taught in public school in the UK. What does that mean? I think it's different than in the US, isn't it?
Well, it's super interesting. So I'm very glad you said that about not generalizing. Broad strokes would be that I have taught in a public school or a state school, we call it in the UK. And that's all I've done. And I've taught only in private schools in the US. So I have not taught the other way around. So I've not taught in a private school in the UK or a public school here, but I know lots of people who have, but my remarks are going to be prefaced around that. The state school I taught was just outside Oxford. It was a mixture of people, of communities, very wealthy people who worked in the university, and a whole range of different types of student. And we call it a bog standard school in the UK. So I taught there for 22 years. It was the year I started was the year before the national curriculum started in the UK. So I had a year of basically quite a lot of autonomy, and thereafter I did not. We had for a while, quite a rigid and extensive national curriculum, which developed over the years. So there were lots of aspects to it that are very different to the experience I've had in the US.
Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but still, I don't know the difference between a public school, a state school, a private school. So if you could.
Okay. Sorry, I misunderstood. Okay, so basically 9% of the population in the UK go to private schools where parents pay. They pay quite a lot of money, and a significant amount of money, almost like college money over here. The rest of the 91% of the population go to state schools, which you would call public schools here, which are used to be run by the government via sort of state or districts, as you would have them here. I'm going to try and translate to what the US. So you would have like a district that runs all the schools in the district. They would get the money from the government. They would allocate that money to the schools. The parents pay nothing. It's totally free. And back then also universities were free as well. So the majority of students in the UK go to those schools that are free and funded by the government. There are obviously there are some faith schools and things who get funding elsewhere, but the majority of people have put their children through that system. There isn't a great deal of choice. They kind of go to their local school and it's, and they don't have to pay anything. And so there is a system around that where, because the money comes from the government, there's then accountability around that. Although that has diversified recently, so it's become a little bit freer, and we have things that are more akin to the charter things that you have here. I think the charter thing, interestingly, was imported from the US to the UK.
Oh, okay. Interesting. So most of your experience was in these state schools, what we would call public schools. And you said there was a national curriculum that was established. And I know that in your introduction, we talked about the fact that you had written curriculum. Was this the curriculum? Had you written curriculum for the national curriculum? Is that what you had done? Okay.
Yeah. So basically the way it worked back then, so it was, I think the first one I was on was not either 1990, I think. They gathered together, there was a government agency, the Qualifications and Curriculum Authority, and they wrote the curriculum, but they gathered together people from every subject area and every level within the subject area. So I was representing the physics high school level. There would have been an elementary or a middle school level person there in science. There would have been a university person. There would have been researchers. And we all got together and we basically wrote lists of content and later skills, but that didn't last very long. But you get the people in the room, basically that's what you do. You just write down, that gets published. The school takes a look at that, and then decides how they're going to, I used to hate that word, deliver the curriculum. I don't think it's pizza, but anyway, they had a whole thing grew up around that, about packages you could buy to deliver the curriculum. But that was basically it.
So there's a national curriculum. What's the teacher's obligation? I mean, how complete does this come? Does the teacher still need to do a lot of work did we come up with another word instead of deliver?
Oh,
but
enact. I mean,
So how strict is this? Because again, when we think of, in the United States, there was major uproar when we tried to just develop, some consistency of what it meant to be educated when you left high school or eighth grade or anything. So what was the specificity and what was the expectations of the teachers enacting this curriculum?
It's 100%. I mean, this is what you do. You don't have a choice. One of the interesting things that happened to me here, I'll just throw little anecdotes that will show you how interesting it was to be like fish out of water for a while here. When somebody said, oh, yeah, I thought I was going to get to do that topic in the curriculum in, I think it was biology or something this year. Not at my current school, at another school. And I don't think I'm going to get to that. So I'm just not going to do that. I'm like, wait, what? You're not going to do it? Like, you have to do it. Like, you have to, like, it's the curriculum. You do it. You deliver the curriculum. You do the entirety of it. You have an obligation to ensure that everybody has done everything. It's always been that way because of the external examination system, because unlike the US, you have exams in sophomore year and exams in senior year, and these matter and they count and they are based on the curriculum. So the teachers are obligated to do the entirety of it. How they do it has evolved. When I first arrived in school, they gave me like the scope and sequence and said, it would be handy if they knew that in a couple of years' time, and gave me a book. That was it. And I got on with it. Now, if you went to a school, you've seen on these videos that are going around, I mean, it is very much more prescribed. This, this is the lesson sequence. This is the lesson. These are the lesson plans that go with that lesson sequence. This is the timing. It is very much more specified than it was when I started. That's developed though. And then you've got places, people like OUP, Oxford University Press. I've declare an interest because I write books for that. We provide a middle school curriculum that covers the entire national curriculum, and it's very specifically, it's obvious where every single part of the curriculum exists in the books and the resources and the lesson plans.
So, and then you came to the US and you found something very similar.
It was so funny. I mean, there are so many funny stories about when I did have a lovely conversation with a coworker, and she said, the thing about this is you can do what you like. You literally can do what you like. The problem is you can do what you like. And that's always stuck with me, because it's like, you can't tell teachers what to do, but you can't not tell them what to do. You need to have that happy balance of what you prescribe them. So I had no scope and sequence. So I basically reverted, went home, and when preparing stuff, and I just used my UK curriculum for my high school courses. And then, but yeah, it took me, I think, probably 2 years, I would have to say, to really appreciate that, yes, this is how it is. And it is so radically different to the UK. And the 3 areas that stand out are the concept of progression, which is in the national curriculum from what you call kindergarten all the way up. There is progression described clearly. There was none of that. The assessment system, and the grading system here, and then this whole concept, as you've talked about, of working together, as a community. So yeah, it took me a while to get used to it, I have to say.
So that's a big difference. Okay, the not having a prescribed curriculum, an agreed upon curriculum. I want to just go one step further with respect to getting this national curriculum, because there have been some, saw a documentary recently, and it showed a department working together to adjust that curriculum or make it work for them. I'm not exactly sure what the proper term is, because they are still responsible for that curriculum. How common is that the teachers are able to get together and work together in a productive way? And I'm asking that because in the US, we say we're going to do that, but it doesn't really, there are obstacles. So is that really happening in the UK, or is that?
Yeah, that happens, and it's always happened. And that is the thing that is the distinct difference. The autonomy piece versus the alignment, the alignment and working together. That's the huge difference. And that's where, if you're going to say there are I don't want to say, that's the difference that's going to make moving towards any kind of collective understanding of what good practice means. That's a huge obstacle, because if you believe in your autonomy and having just the total choice, that's one thing. Whereas my life up until I moved to the US was, I was the head of science in this state school, in this public school. We have 14 teachers in that faculty, in that department, as it's called, 3 technicians. I had a budget, and we had a coffee room, an area we met, and we would just sit there every day, and we would, talk about what we were doing. That was not meeting time. That was not like in this video where they're actually sitting down to do a task. There was that as well. So we had an awful lot of time where we were having the conversations that mean that you get a common understanding of what we're trying to do and how that works and what is best practice and how we can help each other. And that is just the way that works. I mean, that's what you would expect. And when I left teaching for a short time to work for the Institute of Physics, and I was going into schools to help teachers teach physics who didn't have a physics background. So I saw a lot of schools. I mean, I've been in a lot of departments, and it is extremely common. And if there isn't like a special room, everybody will just get together, and have their lunch and talk about teaching and talk about, this was a really terrible lesson and I need some help with this. And then there are times when you saw in that video, you have, you would take, like, let's do something about this topic or this year's worth of work. See if we can like make improvements to that. That is absolutely, yeah, that is commonplace. That is what you would expect. I expect to do that.
So when you're hired, a new teacher being hired in a school, that's just expected. That's the norm. This is how, and not just this school in particular, but this is the way we do this in the UK.
Yeah, you would. The concept of turning up and not having like an enormous number of resources to work from, a very clear, what you would call here, scope and sequence, I think. Scope and sequence with timing, with expectations, with tests, in my case with labs. It would be laid out for you, and then the expectation would be that you would then contribute to the further development of that. I think that's I can't imagine, I've never seen or heard of a school in the UK where that would not be the case.
Okay, so kind of established what the norm is in the UK. And again, there's variability within every school. We understand every school is unique, but for the most part, they're very similar in structure. Let's contrast now to, you came to the US, and then what did you find? And this is not to bash anything. This is just this is just how the systems are different, because I just want to say one more time that, the group of people that I follow on Twitter, and you go to Research Ed, which is where we finally had a chance to meet in person. We talk about the fact that, what are we going to do here in the US? Gosh, in the UK, they're years and years ahead of us. They're more than a decade ahead of us. So you kind of explained what's happening in the UK. And now you came to the US. What did you find? What did you find?
What did I find? Well, the things that I found were in almost complete contrast. Instead of working sort of vertically, you work horizontally. So you have teachers, so there's stratification. I think that's what I found. Like, you have the 9th grade chemistry teacher, you have the 8th grade middle school science teacher. So everybody sits in that horizontal structure. And that, I didn't realize that was how it worked. I don't know. I probably didn't think about it. And so they do that. And then within that structure, they have a lot of autonomy. As I say, I can't speak for people in public schools. Maybe there are schools where there's a lot of more curriculum decided for them. But what I saw was that there was not. So within state standards or something, you have an enormous amount of autonomy. And no one's really checking in the sense of, have you completed everything that's on those state standards, that I understand. So I found the stratification thing a huge degree of autonomy, like incomprehensible to me, because I'd never had that degree of autonomy. And then the other interesting thing that I hadn't expected was that it's quite normal that you would teach in high school, or you would teach in middle school, or you would teach in elementary school, but you wouldn't have taught in any of the other places. That had not occurred to me coming from the UK, where, by contrast, my year would have been teaching 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 grades every year. I mean, I had classes from each grade. And so that was a significant difference. Then I hadn't realized how the grade point average thing is significant. I mean, not always, but that whole assessment piece. There was a really funny anecdote where I was in a meeting. This will show you. I was in a meeting. We were talking about a particular student, and someone said, "Well, yeah, the trouble is, he's this close to a D, and then after that, it's an F." And I said, "What happened to E?" And they looked at me and like, okay, I don't really, I've got a lot to learn about this. In the UK, we have different grades. So we have that assessment system. And so what the UK US thing of the UK structure of exams does put a lot of pressure on students, and teachers talk a lot about the stress of that system. But there's no concept of a student having a grade until they're done. So therefore, if they improve over the course of their sophomore year from being like if essentially failing to getting an A, that's perfectly fine. They can then end up with an A. There is no concept of having a grade. We don't have Power School. We don't have those sort of systems. So I had to get my head around what it meant to have a grade. And that is hugely problematic for me in my cog sci. It's all about the learning, because it is high stakes. Grades are high stakes, and they are the antithesis of what you talk about with students if you want them to learn a lot. So, and then, as I say, the autonomy and the working very much on my own was very different. So those are the main things: the stratification, lack of teaching, accepting your grade, and the assessment thing.
Okay, so let's talk about some things that may be similar. And that is you, as I mentioned a couple times now, you presented at Research Ed. You are interested in the cognitive science, you're interested in science of learning things. Is there any difference in the implementation of those strategies within the two cultures? Or is it just we're kids, we're human beings, this just works?
I've thought a lot about this, and I'm actually changing my perspective on a lot of it almost as we speak. So I spoke in Denver about the strategies, the game-changing strategies that I've used, that I've learned from cognitive science, that I've used in my classroom, and it's worked extremely well. But if you're talking about the contrast of the UK and the US in relation to this, the big question, and you've alluded to, I think, before, is what is this for? What are we doing this for, this thing, this education thing? And there's that. And then there is a huge cultural thing of conformity versus autonomy. So it's much easier, I think, for these things to bed in the UK than they are necessarily in the US. So there are various layers to it. On the one hand, I want them to learn physics. Now, I did teach science, but physics. And I know that the more physics they know, the easier it's going to be. They are going to find it to learn more physics. So the more you know, the easier it is to learn. So therefore, for me on a daily basis, now that I've got into this groove and they have the language of retrieval practice and slop and long-term memory and forgetting and everything, on a like just a day-to-day, week-to-week, semester to semester, it's vastly improved my practice. And but I am an individual, and I'm choosing to do that in my classroom with my students. For change beyond that, within schools and within districts and states and possibly, federally, then there are enormous challenges, because I might put this, I'm going to apply to talk in New York. My next talk, I think, is going to be about something to do with this as well, because I've managed to get together a fabulous group of teachers in my school, and they've enacted this curriculum that is based on the UK. We've moved things around, but it's got cog-sci piece in it, and they're all working together. It takes such a long time to do that, and you've got to have a will to see that these things are better for the students. But we have a clear vision of what we're trying to get to. Like we have got together and we've decided a well-educated student looks like this. They know these things. They can do these things. They are able to apply these things. We have a shared vision of that. I think if you get US teachers together, I've never done it, but I don't know that everybody's trying to do the same thing. And I don't know where the cog-sci pieces, all the cog-sci pieces are tending to revolve around getting stuff into long-term memory, building schema, and so on. If you go back to stratification, if you're teaching a course that is a year long, or even a semester long, there isn't much mileage in that. What mileage is there in developing strategies that help students build their long-term memory in your particular subject area if they're going to learn that subject for a year and then stop and then go on to another subject the following year, which is completely unrelated? Unless there's some kind of joining up then that COGSI piece in the UK works because we have a national curriculum, we have clear goals, we have examination boards, we have external exams. The exams count, so they're high stakes, but in the interim, you can do lots of low stakes work, which gets stuff in their memory, which helps them to pass these exams and so on. In the US, there isn't what incentive is there in order, that is this piece that I am beginning to struggle with now that I've tried to embed it in my own personal practice. I don't know if that answers your
Yeah, I
long
think it's part,
answer.
again, I think it goes back to things that have been in place, had been in place, or are nominally in place. And that is, at some point during the year, if you look at a PD schedule or a CPD schedule, it will have time for vertical articulation. And theoretically, that's when the grade levels get together to talk about exactly what you're talking about. But I don't think it happens very well. And again, it's one of those things that we may say we do that on paper, but it just doesn't happen. And it's very difficult for it to happen because of all the other things that we've already discussed, that it's so freewheeling. I'm going to ask you similar question, but it is, to me, it's a cultural question. And one of the things that, gosh, I was old when I realized that I have no idea what my culture is. And the reason that I don't know what my culture is because I just do stuff. But it's very easy to go to another state and go, wow, they're very different. So I don't know if this is just, a cultural issue in that, and I'm going to broaden this to the United States, is that we just don't want to tell people to do things. That's not who we are.
Yeah, that's very interesting because that's what I say to my UK friends is if you want to understand the US, then just put the premise of you can't tell me what to do in front of everything, and then it'll all make a lot more sense. And because you
Yeah.
just can't, that's, as you say, that is culturally where you are. Whereas, again, broadly and in the UK, that's fine. And I don't know if that's a result, I'm not a sociologist, of some kind of historical thing in terms of the class structure or whatever, but there is that definite difference for sure.
You're not talking about the class structure in the US. We have none.
Exactly.
About thinking more about cognitive science, one of the things that, and being behind, that teachers not understanding, it's not embedded in their practice. I've talked to many teachers now on this podcast, and I ask them, a very similar question. And that is, do people know at your school, do people know you're a hotshot? Do people know? No, no, because because I talk to people who are doing these wonderful things, these teachers, I meet them at national conferences, and they have absolutely no status. They don't want to hear from them at their schools.
Well, my middle school, because we're all together in the same boat in the middle school, they've got some idea and they sort of follow me in various places and so on. Generally, I think no. And I haven't presented my stuff. I did one presentation when I did the original curriculum development, but since then, no. I would say that's not been the case.
And why do you think that is?
Just priorities. Schools have lots of priorities. We've had, in my particular school, we've been looking for a new principal. We've had there does seem to be, the SEL agenda is huge, the DEI agenda is huge. There are lots and lots of pressures, I guess. And this is the thing about it, if it is such a tricky thing to change people's practice, and they don't, if it's difficult to sort of point out it's the unknown, if they don't know that there is something else there.
Yeah.
Why would they want me to come in to talk about the thing that they don't know isn't there? So,
Well, and I think that is another thing that I talk to people about a lot, because I think I have a little bit of a contrary view, and that is that, if people just understood the research, if people just understood the research, and you're shaking your head, yes, but here's my counter argument. Do you know that we absolutely know, based on science, whatever that means here in the US, based on science, is that there's pretty much an agreement of what's healthy eating. And there's pretty much, science about, exercise and the benefits of
Mhm.
exercise. Does that get people in the gym door?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
There needs to be, and I don't know what it is. To me, I always think that it's an emotional understanding. Like if I could just get Helen to try this one thing that I've talked about, and Helen gets to see the kids just
Yeah.
explode with excitement and understanding, and they get it, maybe that emotional component will get them to see, well, why did that happen? How can we do that? So I'm a action first, why second type of guy, where I think a lot of folks is if they just know the why, if they just know, I think the why is important at some point, to understand, to replicate what they did. But me down, Helen.
No, I mean, I was nodding because, being British, I'm very polite. I nod. um, but no, I agree with you. You have to do it to see it, because changing people's practice is incredibly hard. I mean, it's just remarkably hard. And I had like 6 years, I think, with the Institute of Physics, and I was talking to teachers. You have to show them that it works. They have to see that it works. Like, exactly. So I would not try and talk you down. I would try and, get you to get some federal regulation that every teacher has to do retrieval practice at least once a week.
Okay,
And
okay,
then
don't make me cough. Okay, national. You know what? Okay, I'm going to
national.
stop. I'm going to stop you right there. Okay, I'm going to stop you right there. We have in the county where I live, I don't know how many people we have, but I live in my school district where my daughter went to school. It's the fourth largest school district in California. And California, what would be the fifth largest economy in the world if it was a nation? I mean, so it had the fourth, the metropolitan area, not really, but we would say it's about 1 million people. Then we have, and that there's two districts in that 1 million people serving those 1 million folks. And then we have 33 other districts. Okay. Some of them that have their own superintendent, their own governing body. Many of them only go to K-8 and then need to go to another separate district for high school, which makes this articulation piece we talked about even more critical and more difficult to do. So, I mean, we can't do a county-wide measure, much less when you talk about,
Yeah.
and I think, and the reason that I bring that up and make a big deal about it is because, again, we have people saying this is, I mean, I have a lot of respect for you, Helen. We wouldn't be talking if we didn't, and how do we get that done in this place where we live, the United States, with you
Mhm.
can't tell me what to do. And
Mhm.
that's why we have all those school boards because, oh, our kids are different. You can't tell us what to do.
Yep, it's a challenge. Yeah, it's super interesting. I think my hope is, and I really believe all the teachers that I've ever worked with, you wouldn't be in the job. You're certainly not in it for the money. You wouldn't be in the job unless you really wanted to do well. You then end up with all these pressures and everything happening to you, and then somehow you don't have the time to do stuff. But I do think fundamentally, teachers love to see kids learn. That's the thing. And that's the way in. The trouble is, it's going to be like turning a super tanker. And for a while, I was on a group with Eric Mazur in Harvard talking about changing physics education. And I came in very sort of like bright, idealistic about how we could make it required that people do physics in the US. That's again a big difference. They don't have to do physics. And they were just laughing like you can't even do it within within the state, within Boston or wherever. But if we can seed enough places And so all the teachers who are doing the CogSci piece in my school, they've said, they are going to always do it like that now. They're always going to have retrieval practice because it works.
Yeah.
It's the thing that means you know where kids are. It's the only thing I grade. I mean, I cannot be bothered to grade like long sets of questions. The kids can grade the sets of questions and tell me which ones they found hard, and then we can move on. All of those pieces make your life easier, make your job better, make your job more enjoyable because it's more manageable, because you're doing what works. You're not wasting your time on stuff that doesn't work. You're not adding, you're replacing all of those messages. So then, I meet people at Research Ed and it's their first time at Research Ed. And I'm so excited for them. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is great. Just take that, and you don't have to like be a, sledgehammer about it. You just seed it gently, as I've done in my school, I think, with, these ideas really are going to help kids learn and make your life easier. And that's a really winning combo.
I think we better leave there on a high note.
Okay.
Because, there are so many people have expressed something very similar. So, we're hoping that it can spread out. It will last beyond the next superintendent who comes and has to change everything. Because I think good teaching, the things that you just described, if a teacher is doing it, it doesn't matter what curriculum they bring in, what goofy new thing that happens. If a supervisor, principal, whomever comes in to watch a teacher and they teach a good lesson, they recognize that it's a good lesson, and then maybe we have to backfill and let them know why it's good and why you can do it every day and why the kids are learning. But I got my fingers crossed for you, Helen.
Yes.
Helen,
Yes.
do you have a question for me?
Well, yes, I have two questions, because the first question is, if you could just, as we've been talking, and this is, probably scientifically on the cards, if you could magically transport one of the findings or the thoughts of cognitive science into the brains of every teacher in the US, like instantly, what would you want every teacher to know that is going to be really just the most useful thing? Or maybe three things, but what would you want?
Okay, well, I'll let you decide how many things these are.
Okay.
I would just that teachers as a baseline would be able to teach a lesson based on Rosenshine's principles, because so many of the SOL stuff is embedded in that. And so if you did, that would be a baseline from which we could have discussions about, oh, is there a little trick we have about this? Because we know where it fits in the lesson. It's not throwing everything out, oh, we have a new thing. So that's what I would see. And that's basically what my work has been for the past 20 years, is just, how to do explicit instruction. And again, because we're in the US with all the things that we've talked about, you get to have your personality come out still. You could still be an individual here and use all of these good strategies in your lesson.
Can I have a follow-up question?
Okay.
I have started to ballroom dance since I came to the US, which has shown me that I am totally a novice, and it's been really helpful for my practice because I know nothing, and I'm reminded of how the curse of the expert. What have you done like that recently? What should I take up?
I don't know what to take up, but here's one of the questions that I forgot to ask you, is because people who are explicit instruction people, I found that they have some performance element in their past, whether it's in the arts, athletics, or you've got like Carl Hendrick, who was, football coach and a musician, because you just understand, I break these things down. And when I was a teacher, I tell people I was awful as a teacher. I was a really good football coach because I knew how to teach techniques and put them together, but I had never figured out how to generalize that to other content areas. So I think if you have that in your background, anything, again, performance, and if I was working with you, if I was working with you as a coach, Helen, that would be one of the things that I wanted to know about because that's our shared schema. Now we can always use that. That's our anchor for understanding all these other elements.
Totally true. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, before dance, I don't think there was any. I'm just trying to think, but yeah, I think that the dance has definitely cemented the explicit instruction. And I've actually, interestingly, taught my dance instructor how to do explicit instruction in
Oh,
dance to me.
it's funny. When I was younger, I was taking a karate class and it was a young person. It was a young person teaching me. And I said, they showed me some move and it was way too complex for me. And I said, can you show me that again? No, I'm the teacher. Oh, wow. You know what? So you can't go back once you know it. And again, talking about that emotional knowing, if you weren't an explicit person before, and now somebody talked to you about being a novice, oh, I get it. I get it. Helen, it has been a joy, and we will talk. Oh gosh, we'll see each other in New York.
Sure.